Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
So as Jim said, I am a former journalist turned spender of somebody else's money as a philanthropist. Somebody else's money is a guy named Archie Bush. He and his wife, Edith, made quite a bit of money over the years that Archie spent helping to lead the 3M Corporation. And before they passed, they took the majority of their fortune and set up our foundation. The Bush Foundation is a private foundation. Started in 1953, and everything we do is in service of the folks who live either in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, or the 23 Native nations that are within that same geography. So our footprint's pretty small. Our impact is fairly large in that it's concentrated around leadership development and around problem solving. As Jim mentioned, part of my job there, there were a few hats, but part of my job there is partnering with other organizations to advance initiatives that are aligned with ours. And so over the last 4.5 years or so, I've been working with Greater MSP and the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce and the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce on this initiative, which over time is the name of it is morphed. Now it's called BMSP, but it's essentially focused on trying to retain professions of color to the Twin Cities market. And it's about having a more inclusive and more equitable, more just society. And it's also, to be frank, about having a more robust economy. And the way things are evolving in our nation, our region, if we don't do a better job of making sure everyone is able to benefit from and contribute to the health and vitality of our society, then we're all in trouble. So I'm going to come back to this at the end, but I want to emphasize this isn't just gloom and doom and problems. There are actually tools available to help people who want to grow in this arena and want to be engaged in being part of the solution. So one of the things that we've been looking at over the last several years as a region, businesses we're looking at is sort of talent attraction and retention, right? It's not a very sexy topic, but it's really important, right? So you think about how much we benefit from having so many large companies, 18 Fortune 500 companies that are based here, and a bunch of other large companies that are here that aren't quite as big as those, but that are significant. Most of us work for smaller organizations than the Targets or the Best Buys or the 3Ms, right? Well, those companies are struggling to fill positions. Large, small, medium companies are struggling to find and keep talent. It's a national thing. Some of it's about just shifting demographics. For the longest time, though, even as we had churn, it wasn't that big a deal. People like myself would move here from Chicago and take a job, and we'd be fine. Now the pace isn't keeping up any longer, and so it's actually more important than ever that we hold on to the people who come to try us out. So as you can see here, we're tracking toward being about 100,000 workers short next year, and we're not going to fix that. We're not going to get the next year with this problem solved. That gap is in danger of widening if we don't begin to take significant steps. And the good news is that the work is underway. So a number of us have been, as I said, talking about these issues for some years now, and we thought, we have this anecdotal information. We have our own experiences. As Jim mentioned, I moved here initially in 1993. I was a summer intern at the start of June. I got hired. I returned after finishing my degree in December of 93. And Jim and I and another friend of ours, Maria Block, all came in December of 93, figuring out, let's give this place a try. And now I'm 52. Worked out pretty well. But the truth of the matter is an awful lot of people come, try us out, and don't stick for a variety of reasons. And so a number of us have been working on trying to better understand why it is that people come and leave, and what we could do to get more of them to stay and put down roots to make a life here, to build their own lives, but also to make this a healthy community in which to live. So getting beyond just the personal stories, we thought would be really important. We wanted some statistics behind it. We wanted some numbers to help us better understand how different people were experiencing this place. So we pulled together initially a number of focus groups, and then we used the information we got from the focus groups to do pretty in-depth survey. I helped to design the survey, and then it came time to actually take it, it still took me about 35 minutes to fill it out. It was really very, very detailed. They gave us a lot of rich information about how people experience this place, both the good and bad aspects of it. As you can see, we had more than 1,200 people take the time to fill it out. And I think that speaks to just how eager they were to share with us what they were experiencing. 1,200 people of color, should be more specific, right? And so we were really trying to ask people of color living here what their life is like, both in the workplace and in the community, to better understand what parts of it they love and what parts of it have them heading for the hills. So what we discovered, to be truthful, it wasn't all that surprising to those of us who've been living here in this box, right? It resonated in big, big ways. This is a wonderful place to live in many, many respects, regardless of what you look like. But there are challenges that come when you're a person of color. There are challenges, as many of you may know, that come if you're not originally from here. This can be a fairly insular community. And so the great thing about connections is that, in this community, there are many people whose friends go back to, the playground when they were in kindergarten or first grade. And so it can make it difficult for other people coming in to kind of punch through and attach to those circles that have already been formed, regardless of what you look like. But as you might imagine, it is the case, it's even more difficult if you add race to that mix, race ethnicity to it. And so what we discovered was that people coming in from outside the market have a hard time kind of plugging in and finding their people. The biggest reason to stay is family ties. And as mentioned, I moved away and I moved back. My wife and I moved back when we got ready to have kids, and we can kind of picture that version of life here, with the house, the good public schools, the parks, all the amenities that come along. But when I was in my mid-20s, before I had kids, that stuff wasn't all that high on the list for me. It was more the social aspects of life here, which were lacking. The biggest reason people leave the market is a lack of diversity and cultural awareness. So it can be isolating, right? That's just the nature of life in this community. So it's not to pick on you, right? But this isn't the most diverse room in the world, right? In the country, right? And that's much of what moving in Minnesota is, especially if you're moving in professional circles. And so the other important aspect of that is if you come from New York, as I did originally, I'm a New York native, or Chicago, where I moved here, or DC, where I went to spend part of my time in grad school, you're just used to moving in spaces that are far more diverse than many spaces you've been in Minnesota. So it's an adjustment. It doesn't mean it can't be made, but there are trade-offs that come with that, right? So I bring it up just because if you're from here originally, you may be struck by how much more diverse this place is than it is. I see it myself in the 26 years I go back, right? It's more diverse now than it was, in the 80s and the 90s. It remains far less diverse than the communities in which I grew up and worked. So that's part of the tension in terms of what's normal, what are we used to, right? So where this matters is that people under 40, younger folks without kids who are more mobile, makes all the sense. Where do I really want to put down roots? You're doing that in your 20s and maybe early 30s. If they're coming in from other parts of the country, they get here and it's kind of a shock that there are so few of us and so few of us moving in sort of professional circles and finding their people. Not that you expect to live in a black world all the time, but never stepping into it or really stepping into it's also a pretty significant shift and sacrifice for people to make. People over 40 with children who own a home are staying at rates that are comparable to their white friends and neighbors. So if you check a few key boxes, you're a little bit older, a little grayer, have a couple kids, then this place looks amazing. Until you get there, then it can be hard to find community and for this to be the place that you want to put down roots. And especially so with black folks. And I think that part of that is because more of us come from communities where there are sizable, solid, middle-class black communities in which you can live and work than you might find for some other communities. So I'm going to kind of race through this quickly now. I'm going to come back to pieces of it in a moment. If you've got questions as I'm going, you're looking for clarity, feel free to just chime in. And I will leave room for questions at the end as well. But if I say something that's not quite clear, don't be shy. Just raise your hand and we'll do it at the moment. So there were 6 key themes that emerged from the survey that I think are worth kind of understanding and for us to think about what we do about them. One is that there are relatively few, compared to other markets, compared to where most of us are from, few culturally specific amenities, and there's disparities in the community as well. We talk about disparities all the time, whether that's in education or healthcare, or some of the issues we see around criminal justice. That it looks and feels that it's different here than in the markets. It just is. Connection, as I said already, oftentimes people have a hard time just building meaningful, deep connections with other folks. It isn't just, as I said, around race and ethnicity, but it's exacerbated when you have that dimension. Representation is just, where do you see us? What kind of leadership roles are we in? When do we show up? And the reality is that we tend to not see as many people of color leadership roles here as you do in other markets. And what you get as a result, too, is an over sort of representation, inside the metro section of the Star Tribune when there's been a crime committed or about, some sort of dysfunction in communities. Not that those things don't happen, that they're not real, but they're out of balance compared to what we see in other markets. We deal with bias and discrimination, which isn't new, that exists everywhere, but it shows up a little differently here. I think in part because of the point I made earlier about we're coming from two different ends to some degree, just what our expectations and our history's been up to now. And so I think there are a lot more people who just aren't as comfortable with or as familiar with people of color, and whether it's intentional and hostile or whether it's just on some level of degree of ignorance, that you bump into more folks who aren't quite sure what to make of you, which is just an odd way to move the world, right? If you're used to just being yourself. Professional advancement is one that is really critical. As I said, this is much of this work is being driven by the business community, not solely the business community, but much of it has been. And oftentimes people come, as I did, juniors in their career, just trying to get started, and you don't often see. This isn't just about race, but in the absence of diversity in leadership. When you come into an organization, no one says to you, "Hey, Duchesne, here's how you can move up. Here's what it takes to succeed here. Here's what's possible for you." No one looks like you runs anything. You can reasonably assume there is no plan for you to move up. So then when the call comes from Cleveland or Raleigh or Charlotte or Dallas, which is where I went more than 20 years ago, you go, well, maybe my odds are better there. So we need to do better on that front in terms of painting a picture, not just for people of color, for everyone, anyone working in an organization should have a sense of what it takes to advance, what the opportunities might be. And the last part is the diversity and inclusion efforts in the workplace. They're often just very weak. There may be an annual 90-minute talk, and then that's it until about that same time next year. Maybe it's during Black History Month. There isn't actually any meaningful, ongoing, effective work happening in organizations throughout the year. So living here, we learned this a ton of information about how people experience it. And I think one of the most important things is just understanding how people experience different stages of life. As I said already, I had different needs at 25 when I first moved here than I did, even 10 years later. 10 years later, I had kids, I had a house, all that stuff. None of those things, that 35-year-old version of me wasn't really meaningful to the 25-year-old version of me. It wasn't really yet. So the reality is that a lot of us here, when we look around, are struggling with what there is to do culturally. So you think, boy, we've got a great theater scene, we've got live music, and there's a lot going on. It's not a dead town, right? We know this, but the things that appeal to people of color are lacking relative to Chicago or New York or LA or Atlanta or many, many other towns. I will tell you, I think this is getting better. I know it's getting better, but it's still something that you can sense and that you long for. So I've actually, I'm sure some of you have done the same thing, but I've flown to other cities to see performers because I knew they weren't coming to the Twin Cities. And I really wanted to see them. So people do that all the time, I realize that. But I feel like this, for our community, more we need to do that at times, or just go without and just watch them on TV. Probably of the many things, I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but I'd say of the many things on this slide that I thought were most revealing, only 11% of people identified weather as one of the top reasons they want to leave the market. Right? So my running joke, but I kind of mean it, I bet more than 11% of white people will leave because of the weather. So my goal in all of this work, right, is for Black people and Latinx members and Asian American, Native American folks to have all the other stuff fall away so we can be as upset about the weather as
Native people lived in this weather.
Oh yeah. We all have. I grew up in New York. I didn't have to buy any new clothing to adjust to live in here. That was not the hard part of adjusting to life
And
here.
Native people are few in number, and there's a reason for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So connection. As I said, I'm well aware that this isn't just about issues of race or ethnicity, right? This can be a great place once you have friends, right? I think that's one of the, to deal with both pieces of it. I think if you're in your hand, I've got some deep friendships that go back now, more than 25 years, but it can be a challenge to punch through. And so, once again, picture the 25, 26, 27-year-old trying to figure out where they're going to make their way. If they don't seem to feel like it's clicking, and once again, it's a shortage of talent everywhere. People are calling all the time. Why wouldn't you take a chance to go to a place where you might actually have something to do on Friday night or Saturday afternoon if you're going home and you're lonely, which is the case with too many people. So we've been trying to actually, along these lines, trying to create more opportunities to just go out and meet people, mixers. Some of them are kind of wine and cheese like events. Some of them are let's go for a bike ride. Some of them are let's go see a play. Some of them are let's go, walk along the river and learn more about this community that we've chosen to live, at least for now, right? Giving people ways to attach to both place and other folks. And the reality is that if we can help people kind of find the folks that can be their people, it becomes home. That's what it is ultimately. It doesn't matter if there's a ton of things to do if you're actually doing it, or if you're doing it in isolation. So some people might like to go out to dinner by themselves, and to the theater by themselves, and to, out of town by themselves. And everyone needs that now and then, but if that's every Friday, something's wrong, generally, right? And so what we're trying to do is create more opportunities for people to find folks that they can do those things with. The bias and discrimination piece is one that is tough, it's complex, and it's also kind of simple because it's every one of us. It's the people we know, right? This is a place where, as I said, I think we're not as experienced in dealing with difference or talking about difference. And we also, to be frank, in this region tend to be much more cautious and passive-aggressive. So we're often not having the conversation we really need to have. We dance around things. And so it means that we never get beyond sort of surface level. There are just, I think, too many moments. I'm a native New Yorker, which I will admit means that at times we can be a little too direct, a little too aggressive, but we tend to be pretty clear about what we think. And so you know where you stand more often than not with us. I think this place is not polar opposite, but definitely very different. And so that's one of the barriers that we face as a region to building the kinds of authentic relationships that I think are critical to having people feel like they're really going to make a life here and have the same kinds of opportunities that we all want, and that they may seek elsewhere if they don't connect here. So a lot of the work we've been doing is around just helping people stop and think more critically about how they view the world around them, why that is, and what they might do to better understand and connect with folks whose walks are different, and whose values may be different, and whose stories are different, and to see, merit in other perspectives, and to see beauty in other experiences, and to be a little more curious about why people see the world the way they do, and why people want the things that they want that may be different than what we want. So as much of this work is focused on the workplace, but obviously if you're stretching and you're learning how to work and build relationships across difference in the workplace, then you can do it in church on Sunday, and you can do it at the soccer field on Tuesday afternoon, and you can do it at the theater on Saturday night. So the representation piece I touched on briefly earlier is we just aren't seen in as many leadership this region as you see in other parts of the country. If you go to Charlotte or Raleigh or Seattle or Dallas, other major metropolitan areas, there's just people of color in more leading roles than you see in the Twin Cities and you see in Minnesota, generally speaking. And so it both affects white folks' view of who we are and what we can do, and also shapes our own sense of what our place in this community is, in this space is. It certainly shapes the experience that our kids have in terms of what leadership looks like, what the base of leadership is, and what's expected ever possible from them. So I think it's important that we talk about it because it's real, and that we be more intentional when we have opportunities to fill jobs, to make decisions about who's going to lead, who's going to help shape where an organization is going to go. That we think critically about how we build diverse teams and diverse leadership teams, right? Because it's no one person ultimately that can help figure out what the right answers are. And other parts of the country are eating our lunch at this rate, to be honest with you. Yes?
So the only 35% really strikes me. I mean, do you have any benchmark for what, has this question been asked in other markets?
We don't, and I think we're going to do this again, so it still won't be other markets. We're going to do this again later this year, so we'll be able to see how the numbers are moving. But it comes down again to, so many of us are transplants, particularly, to be frank, many of us who are in leadership roles. Right? So I got my college degree and my master's degree elsewhere than I moved here. And that's true for many of us who are leading roles here are transplants. So we're coming from other markets where we've seen more diverse. So it's not like it's 50-50, right? It's America. But we can tell, based on the other places we've lived and worked, that it's different here, it's less here. And as a result, that the options seem less here than they might be elsewhere. And so it's a real problem. If you look at who's in the C-suite and no one looks like you, even if it's not intended, the message is that this isn't for you. And so I think once again, people have to be really explicit. If it could be for you, someone needs to say that, and they need to back it up over time. Because otherwise, as I said, when that call comes from some other market, and they're coming all the time, people get paid to find talent. There is a dearth of it. And, if we're talking about diverse talent, there's less of that than there is in white talent, right? So the reality is that if we're going to address this, we have to be really intentional. We have to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we have issues here that we've got to work on. And we've got to be really intentional about saying, here's what we see for you, here's what's possible, here's what you've got to deliver, no one's going to expect it just be handed on a platter, but here's what possible, what you would expect if you perform. Here are the commitments we're going to make to you to help you develop. Yes?
Did you talk to corporate leadership about this? What do they say?
Yeah, we've spoken a lot with them, and I think they have lots of answers to it. Part of it is, it's network. Who do you know, right? So the highest level positions are about what you know, what you've done so far, and what your network is, right? And so if you're in an environment that isn't very diverse, the network's not very diverse, it makes it harder. So they're actively working at it, but the truth of the matter is that I think more of them need to take more risks, lowercase r risk, not bet the company risk, but if it's dependent on my knowing someone who knows you for me to hire you or for me to trust you, then we're in trouble, right? And I think too much of that goes on in this region. There's a ton of talent that isn't recognized in this market that goes to other markets and source, right? So they're able to take the same people who lead, who come to the Twin Cities, and don't seem to punch through with leadership roles, and then they're advancing in other markets. And so when that happens over a period of decades, there's a message in that.
I would agree with that. I was just wondering how they talk. Because in my experience, how they talk is not how they behave.
I think that they're trying. I know they're trying. I'll say that. I know they're trying. And I also think that when it comes down to making the decision and pulling the trigger and hiring that next CFO or CEO or senior vice president of XYZ, that a lot of them have a hard time doing it if it isn't someone who they have some connection to or feel more of a relationship with than what's generally been the case. I know for a fact folks are working on it. I think for the most part they're working too slowly. be frank, and they need to show a little more courage. You hire white folks who don't work out too, right? So it's not like it's, oh my gosh, if we hire a black guy, it doesn't work out, the end of the world, right? And more often than not, I think what you find is that most of us who get to these kinds of roles are going to bring 110% because we understand how important it is that we succeed. So it's something people are working on. It's slow and it's hard, and as I said, it takes willingness to step out of your comfort zone if you're going to actually see a change. And the reality is, once it begins to tilt, then it feeds off itself. I'm going to deeper in the presentation and show you what the office I work in looks like, which is incredibly diverse, which makes it easier for us to recruit now because we have a diverse network to start with. So media coverage, that I touched on earlier, is a part of it. It's not blaming the media. There are bad things that happen in our society, but we'd love to see better balance and more coverage of the positive things that are happening here, because those are happening every day as well. I touched on this a bit already. I won't belabor it. I think it's really important to say to folks, whether they're coming in truly junior level sort of roles or further up the line, to articulate what does it take to move up here? What do your numbers have to be? What's performance have to be? What kind of investments are we going to make in you as an organization to help you grow and succeed and stay here? How do we make the most of the talents you've got, the smarts you've got? And it happens in some places, but in most places it doesn't happen very well, regardless of what you look like. The difference is if you're white, no one tells you what it takes to succeed, but everybody who runs the place is white, you don't ever question whether you can advance or not based on your race, right? Whereas if you're a person of color and no one who looks like you runs anything there, and no one specifically says to you, this is what's possible, you can reasonably assume that no one sees that for you in that organization. And then that call comes from Cleveland, right? And you're on a plane to interview. And there's no guarantees there either, but if you figured out is that it's unlikely here, why didn't you go? So we're going to do a better job of really having a plan for everyone. This isn't, as I want to really be clear about this, this isn't just like pull the people of color aside and promise them things. It's tell everybody what it takes to win, what it takes to advance within an organization, and be consistent about it. And then the workplace piece is it's critical. So Jim may or may not recall this, but when I got hired at the paper, so as I mentioned, I was an intern, and they created a job to hire me at the end of the internship. And I was pretty cheap. I was right out of school, right? So it wasn't like they spent $1 million for bringing me in. But there was a bit of a firestorm because there were people who had been working there for years as news assistants, which is a tier below being a full reporter, who wanted to move up to reporter status. And there were people who were reporting, but they're only part-time reporters. And they brought me as a full-time reporter above them. And so I thankfully missed most of the energy around this because I was back in Chicago finishing my degree. And so by the time I came back to the Twin Cities, it was largely resolved. But there were people who were angry that I had been given this opportunity when they'd been there for years working. And here's the deal. They'd been there for years working, and no one saw fit to create a job for them. Right? They'd been there for years working as news assistants, as part-time reporters who could have chosen to go to another market to get a full-time reporting job, which is what I was doing, right? And so I think even when you get hired by people who have the best of intentions, so the editor and the publisher decided to, allocate some money and hire me. And then I didn't work that closely with the editor. It was several months below, working, as I like to say, in general population, right? Not everybody is on the same page. And so I bring it up because oftentimes, even when an organization says it's got the right goals, getting the people on the shop floor, so to speak, to walk it and talk it and live it is a very, very different deal. And it's an abstract thing if it's over there. It's real if someone just got the job you wanted, right? It's real if someone just got the opportunity you think you were entitled to. So to be clear, that wasn't most of the room. Most of the room was really welcoming, and most of the room was affirming of me, and I'm still here, right? So things worked out. But I do remember vividly, like, some of the energy around that. These people who were angry that they hired this kid who was coming right out of school, and had been in this business all these years with this company all these years. And you look around the room, it's like you got like so few people of color. and you have a chance to hire somebody who's come in as an intern and demonstrated their ability to do good work now but to grow, it shouldn't have been much of a discussion about whether that was a good call or not, right? But the reality was there was quite a bit of energy around it, because when it comes down to living with it, we struggle. It gets hard when it gets close to us. And so I bring that up because so often, as I said, there are people who are brought into roles, and there may be opportunities that either we or someone we are vested in or much we wanted, and we're not always, as a result, as welcoming as we could be or as supportive as we could be. And the good news is that there were far more welcoming and supportive people in that space than those who were not, who are left. But that doesn't happen often enough. I think too often our coworkers are, if not hostile, sort of indifferent. And I think we've got to get beyond the difference, we've got to get beyond tolerance, right? To being intentionally welcoming of other folks, especially if they're trying to figure out if this is where they're going to make a life. So there's a lot of work to be done here. I think so much of it is just about personal relationships, and each of us sort of taking responsibility for how we show up in spaces where we begin, whether they're at work or elsewhere. So this is my summer internship class, and so I'm kind of far right in case you couldn't figure it out. And so my internship was a great example of what we need to have more of in our communities, right? And so this internship program, as you can see there, about a little more than half of the folks there are people of color, and it's just specifically designed to try and give opportunities to young folks who are trying to punch through and enter journalism. The guy on the far left, Louis Young, is now a designer at the Star Tribune. He got hired a few years later. The woman to his immediate left, right, and Kelly was at the paper also for probably approaching 20 years as a copy editor. So it was a pretty good class, I gotta say. Pretty good payoff for one summer. I had an ideal experience there in many respects, because beyond getting the job offer, the editor of the paper actually was explicit with me about saying, here's what I see for you, here's what I want for you and for us out of you, is what it takes to advance. There were other editors and reporters and folks without titles in the room who were really critical in my attachment to the organization and to this community, which is why I stayed. So I know it can happen because I've lived it. And even though I've left the paper, I left 4.5 years ago, I didn't leave out of frustration or anger. I got an amazing offer to go give somebody else's money away, right? And to move the community some other way to take on some new challenges. Then I bring this up because I think we're doing it. We're not doing enough of it. There were hard times along the way for me at the paper. Not everybody was excited to see me, and that's fine. It's got a pretty healthy ego, as Jim will tell you. But most people were. I mean, most people were intentional. I distinctly remember the people who would invite me out to lunch or over to dinner, or out if they were going to go see a show or do something else, who included me in their world, as opposed to just walking by hoping I had a good weekend. Like they would bring me into their weekend, right? And so I bring that up because I think we actually individually can be those people. And I had vivid memories, that go back 25, 26 years of folks who extended themselves to say, hey, we're doing this, do you want to come along? And we respond by and said, hey, great story on blah, 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 blah. Just seeing me, engaging with me, and making me feel like it was going to be okay. Because I didn't have any, before I came in, I didn't have any friends or family, no connection to anyone at school here. I knew no one here. And so, they became my people by choosing to invite me into their world. And so I think it's not that hard to do. And even when I got invitations that I couldn't accept, I appreciated the fact that people extended them. So part of why I do these talks is I don't think it's that complicated on some level. And it doesn't require having a PhD in anthropology to connect with somebody whose background may be a little bit different than yours is. Even if you step in it now and then, that's fine. We all do, right? That's life. Every now and then we say something, or we think we may have. I woke up in a cold sweat the other night. I thought I was in my office, and there's a board member named Armando, and I woke up and I thought, did I call Armando Rudy? So I sent him an email saying, hey man, I'm battling this cold. I apologize if I called you out of your name the other day. I'm a little rude. And he called me laughing because didn't happen. But it was fine. Like it wasn't like it just wasn't that big a deal, right? And so I just think I say that because I think we need to show a little more courage. I think so often that the moments where we don't step in and don't say it because we're afraid of getting it wrong, and it's that may happen now and then, but in worrying about being vulnerable and worrying about getting it wrong, we've missed an opportunity to build meaningful connections with people, and that isolation leads people to leave. So Jim mentioned I'm married to Angela Davis, who's at NPR, was at WCCO, and before the KSTP. And we joked about, the lonely Friday nights. I really didn't have as many of them as she did because I worked in a larger news organization that was very intentional about getting people together. And I later became the recruiter at the newsroom for the Star Trib. And so I would be intentional, especially with newer people, like, let's go ice skating, let's go bowling. And it was like the cruise director of a ship or something. Let's get people out in the community, right? And so you might assume wrongly that people have all kinds of stuff going on because you do, because you built a network. There's a good chance that they don't, especially if they're new. And you don't have to be there for every people, right? So some of the people I hung out with most when I was first here aren't people I hang out with the most anymore because my life has changed. I got 2 kids, I wife, a house in St. Paul, but my circle is different now than it was back then. That's okay. That's what all of us do at the time. So I'm fond of this picture because it was a terrific summer. It made me, I applied for 19 internships all over the country, and this trip called for us with a good offer. I could have been anywhere, and I'm really lucky that it was here. This is where I work today, the Bush Foundation. It's a lot of faces, which you can't see, but we're almost 50% people of color. It's about a 60-40 split these days. And I bring it up just because it's a really fascinating place to work, because we have so many different paths coming into that door every day, and we can have conversations about a whole bunch of things, which is important for the nature of the work that we do, as we're trying to understand and serve the community. We've been intentional about staffing the way we have. So I've got time for questions. I also want to make sure that you see there are resources available. I mentioned already there's a toolkit. I can get all this stuff. I can give you the PowerPoint if you want to. There's a racial equity resource directory that the Wilder Foundation's Compass site has that the Bush Foundation underwrites the cost of. So if you're looking for speakers or looking for consultants, looking for organizations that work in this space, there's a ton. It's a dynamic list. Always working on it. There are organizations from the Council on American Islamic Relations to consultants and culture brokers, or some of you may have been to a Martin's table at one point or another where they bring people from different backgrounds together for dinner. There are a lot of different ways to connect across difference. Pillsbury House does Breaking Ice, which is live performance that sort of brings some of the foibles to the surface so we can talk about them. They're really skilled at that. And there are books. And there are more books. And yes, more books. So there are a lot of ways to sort of cross from where we are to where we want to be, but it takes action. Yes?
With the work that you've done, have you found difference for acceptance between women of color and men of color?
At times, and it isn't. There are a lot more women, especially African American women, than African American men with degrees. So to a degree that we're mostly focused on professional set for the recruitment or retention battle. There were fewer folks who fit my profile than fit my wife's. I think the men sometimes connect more easily around like sports or things like that. Not that there's any isolation that still exists. I think it can be harder at times for the women, especially if they're single, than for the men.
Recommendations for how some white Scandinavians living in the Twin Cities might contribute to this effort?
Yeah, I think it's large and small. So some would simply like look around you, like who's in your circle, who are you walking past in the office, who's on your block. So when we moved into our house, it'll be 20 years on Tuesday been in my house. Right? So we had one set of neighbors where they came over with a crock pot, right? And right next door, and the other neighbors, it took them 6 weeks to say hello. And literally, like, if we were coming out of the door to leave our house and they were pulling up in their car, they would sit in their car until we got in our car and drove away. Not making this up. 20 years ago. This is 1953, right? This is 99. And so luckily we had the neighbors who embraced us right away, right? They brought food on day one. So I don't think you have to go down the street corner and look for people. I think that they're there, right? I think it's just make eye contact, say hello, how are you doing? Introduce yourself. If you're gonna go and grab lunch, say, hey, we got lunch plans? Like I said, even when they can't do it, just the fact that they got the invitation is meaningful. It just is. And I think too often people float by assuming, they're fine, or they won't say yes. And they might not say yes. Maybe they've got plans, right? But they might say yes.
Sometimes I try to be a little more embracing, like in the grocery store. Black women do not make eye contact with me. I can't even smile at them because they don't look at me.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
I would say keep trying, because if I think they don't, to the extent that you're experiencing it that way, maybe because so few people even trying what you're trying, and they're used to not having anybody try. That's part of it. At some point, you just turn that off if no one ever looks up to acknowledge you, right? So I would say, given the amount of pain that must be for them, you can extend yourself and try. And if they don't reciprocate, well, you try.
A lot of times I try to use their kids as a bridge.
Yeah.
Interact with kids, at least they look at me.
Yeah, kids, yeah. And I think so. I think that's I don't doubt that's how you're experiencing. I think it's a function of what they've been through in living here, especially.
You mentioned earlier that your sense is that more of the leadership cohort that is diverse in the Twin Cities are from elsewhere.
Yep.
To the extent that you can reach people who aren't those folks, do you think it's that young professionals of color are leaving the Twin Cities, or they're just not even developing because of
I think it's a combination. I think we do a pretty poor job in this market of making the most of diverse talent that's here. So, what's happening with kids in North Minneapolis, what's happening with kids in Brocktown and St. Paul, right? And then I know that a number of sort of middle-class, college-educated families whose kids grow up here in relative isolation, whether they're, at Wayzata High School or Central High School or SPA, oftentimes those families, the ones who've got the money for it, will send their kids to school on the East Coast. Mike got a senior in high school and a junior in high school, and we're focused on historically black colleges on the East Coast for them, because I think it will be grounding and affirming for them. And they haven't grown up in a world of hurt. We've been intentional in making sure that they have a range of friends who look like them, but this is different than the place I grew up in. Yes?
I'm just wondering how that would translate to our congregation, where we're looking for to become more diverse, and where if people who may have the same values as we do see us as so white. I mean, we have few people of color. Is that a turnoff for them, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, it probably is, but I think it's some of it's about just building individual relationships with people, right? And so if someone has a connection to you or to you or to you, and you invite them, maybe you invite them and a couple other folks, and they're not the only ones who are there on a Sunday, right? And just own it, just say and acknowledge up front, we're not totally diverse, but we're working on it. We want to be a place that looks more like the community. We want to be a place where everyone feels welcome, and where everyone feels wanted, and where everyone can benefit and contribute to what this space is, but we're trying to do it. You in the back?
Several years ago, I was working with representatives from various congregations around the United States, and a Black individual came as part of the membership team that was visiting during that conference. And we here at First Unitarian Society brought up the fact that we are not as diverse as we want to be. And someone said, well, the people, it's because we are humanists and there aren't very many people that are Black humanists. And this guy said, no. He said, Chicago has a Black humanist church. So he called us on it, and he said, that's a cop-out. And we all talk pretty, openly in that group. But I'll never forget that, because that was a perfect example of how this was several years ago here in this congregation, but we kept kind of patting ourselves on the head and saying, well, it's okay because, not many people of color want to come here because they don't look at things the same way. And he really called us out.
That's good. The reality is it's harder, but those two questions, it may be harder to diversify, starting from, such a low number now. It's also harder moving this community as a person of color, right? So think about the entirety of it and what role you want to play in beginning to adjust it. You had a question.
Yeah, in regards to building more of an African American middle class here in Twin Cities, is there something that city governments could be doing in terms of even economic policies?
I think the challenge is that we're so scattered. We're here. We're just everywhere. And I'm not wishing for the days when we were redlined into particular neighborhoods anymore. It's not a matter of that. But I think you can move here and not see what it looks like you, right? I live in Highland Park. My part of Highland Park's not that diverse, to be honest with you. We've got friends who live all over the metro area. So I think there are fraternal and fraternities and sororities and other clubs and organizations that we try to connect through that kind of help with that. But the city can do, I think probably what I'd love to see is just more places to hang out, more restaurants and music places, and just folks where you can go where just see other people of color having a good time.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.